Hello everybody. Today we want to look into the first few of our basic stitches that we use for embroidery and other projects. And I want to start really slow. We already talked about all the materials that you need. So we have the thread, we have some kind of fabric, kind of a woven linen is ideal, but you can use other fabrics too. So we also have some needles here in my fancy lipstick needle cushion. So I will just choose one that is appropriate for my fabric, and then I will just go ahead and start introducing to a few stitches. So I always try to poke the needle into the fabric and see, does it go into the fabric? Does it damage the individual fibers, or is it just going right in between? So that would be a good choice. And as I mentioned before, I tend to take a little thicker needle, not too long though, but thicker. So it makes a nice big hole, and then the thread glides through it very easily. So then in order to show it to you and it has more effect, I will choose a black thread. So out of my braid that we did like in the last session, I'll just take a black one and just pull it all the way out without destroying my braid and not getting everything into a chaos here. So that can be taken away. So then the next choice is how many of those individual threads you really need. So this is, I guess, a 6. Let's move here, 6, yep. So that means if you unravel that a little bit, to twist it in the other direction that it is twisted, you can see that there are 6 individual threads. So you can choose the whole thing. That makes a really big fat, impression. Or you can use only half of it. Like 3 of those would just make, it's a little softer on everything. Let's see, 3. Or like 2 or 1, like this is 3. It's a thinner line. You can take only 1 or 2 of the, it's totally up to you. For the purpose of showing it to you and being very visible, I go with the whole thing. So I will use all of them. So ideally your thread is double the length of from your hand to your elbow. And when we made the braid, it had a reason, because it shouldn't be too long and it shouldn't be too short. If you have threads that are very short, you have a lot of endings and beginning, and ends, and so a lot of knots, and you have to really, you have a lot of cleanup work to do. If it's too long and you go through your linen multiple times, first of all, the thread itself gets a little worn out. It gets dull and more matte looking, but it also, it loses the shine, and it just has a lot of wear and tear on it. And you don't want that. And the other thing is it spins around and knots more often the longer the thread is. So we don't want that either. So the length of your elbow is actually always a good consideration on how long you take the thread. And so I'll try to get it in. Usually, it's best if you just cut the ends off to have all the little ends in the same length, and then get it into your needle. And that I said before, this one is double the length of my elbow, because I will push it almost all the way down to the end. So they are almost the same length. So in the end, it again ends up with my elbow length that way. So the best way to start is actually if we make a little knot at the end. That knot, like my favorite way to do it, I mean, you can whatever knot it around like you do your shoelaces or something. So I will just wrap this around my finger here, maybe once or twice. Like this is a really thick, so one time around is plenty. So then I kind of have that tight, and then I roll it off my finger, like with my thumb. So again, I start here, wrap it around once, and then with my thumb, with the help of my thumb, I roll this off my finger towards the tip. And I roll it, roll it, roll it. And then it builds up this little twist here. And that I just grab and push to the end. So I have a little knot. So I'll show you. So I have that end here. I take this and wrap around the thread once. And then with the help of my thumb, I roll those two things together. And I roll it, roll it, roll it until I am with my fingertip on my index finger, and then I take my middle finger and I just push both of those to the end, and I have a little knot. So this is the easiest and quickest way to do a knot. I have a little extra here. I can take that away, just cut it off. Sometimes you're very close to the edge, but it's fine. You know, I just want to have a knot and not much left at the end. So this is a good starting point. So then the first stitch I will show you. So a hoop has a big advantage. So you put it here, you put your fabric over it, and then the second part of the hoop that is slightly bigger, you just get over that fabric as tight as possible. And then with the help of this screw here on the side, you can open that screw a little more if it's too tight, and you can close it then after you have, you know, put your linen into it. So that way I have it over it, so it's the same height everywhere, and I see there are still a few folds here that I can straighten out. I really want to make that perfectly straight, and you can see that on the weave of your linen, you know, if you are straight or not. Oops, jumped out again. I have to tighten it a little bit before I straighten it out. So, and always follow the lines of your weave. So, and once you're happy and it's okay, then you can really tighten it more so that the hoop stays on there really good. So the big advantage of having a hoop is that you are always perfectly in line, and you can see what you're doing, and everything is straightened out all the time. So that's very helpful. So you can start. Let's do the first one. That would be our running stitch, the basic running stitch. So we always start from the back. That's where our little knot will be, and we will just come out somewhere close to the edge. You can go either with the measurement, or you can just count the thread. So let's say I do a running stitch over 5 threads. That means I will go in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I go in here. So then I come out 5 stitches to the right of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you have to be careful that you stay in the same line here from my original stitch. So you cannot just jump up here and down there or be crooked. So you always try to make it perfectly in line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You go in there. We come out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops. 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so on. So the nice thing about a running stitch is that it looks the same in the front and in the back, except that you have the endings and the beginnings in the back. But the overall view is basically the same. So that's a nice advantage of a running stitch. It's very decorative, and I use it for a lot of projects, and some of which I will show you a little later. That's the borrow stitching and other little fun things. So I will do a few more. Okay, the reason why I did 2 rows, I want to show you a variation of that, and for that I will use a different thread. Let's take a gray one. Same thing. I will put it onto my needle and make a knot in it. A great artist that I admire, she told me a little trick once. When you get your thread into the needle, usually people, like let's say this would be my needle, usually people hold the needle and then they try to get that thread into it. So the hand with the needle is basically sturdy, and the thread tries, the other hand tries to get that thread into the needle. But she said, it works so much better if you hold the thread in your hand, have this hand be the stationary hand, and then try to get your needle over it. Like just this way around. And I tried it, and I don't know why, but it works. It works better than getting the soft thread into the hard, sturdy needle, versus holding the soft thread really sturdy at the tip of the thread and then get your needle over it. So it's worth a try. And I told it many of my students, and some of them said, oh yeah, it works. And others say like, nah, I'll just do whatever I always did. So I made a knot into my thread. And what I want to do a variation of this running stitch on the second row here. And for that, I will go in with my different color thread. And you can choose if it's more comfortable to stitch from the right to the left or the left to the right. So whatever. So we need the second row. I will do that from the right to the left, just for the sake of it. And I will just come out at the same point where I came out with my black thread before. Same opening. So what I want to do is now, it's called like a whipped running stitch. Really simple. So this time we will only stay on the top surface. We don't go back into our piece anymore. So we just stay on top, and what we do a kind of a looping around the stitches that we already made. So the first one, I go in from the top to the bottom, sideways basically. Then I get my thread at the bottom again. The next stitch, I come up from the bottom to the top, go in sideways. And so on. It's very simple, but the effect is pretty. It really looks like a very soft line now. Before, it's kind of a very hard line, but with the gray wrapped around, and it doesn't need to be a second color or something. So if you only want to work in one color, but by the softness of it, that it gets this wave to it, so that is makes it look very nice. And these are stitches that go from the bottom to the top only, as you can see. And of course you'll think like, what would be if I go up and the next time down and up and down? Would it be more geometric? Would it do a big difference? So let's try that. So now I'm on the top. Let's just do a straight line down. Oops. And then the next one would be up again. And down. So there are many variations that you can do. And it's a personal preference what you like more. If you do more geometric designs, things that are a little more rigid or straight, or perfectly with the measurements and whatnot, then maybe the second choice would be a little better. If you are more into like organic shapes and things from nature, flowers, whatever, maybe the first one is a little more matching the style. So as you can see now, here we have the whipped running stitch, and then this one is just the wave, through the running stitch. I hope you can see the details really well. Okay, so having that running stitch, and we'll just put that second thread aside, and I will just put it in the back of my work so it's not interfering with the front look. And I will get my needle back into my black thread because that is really way better for visibility. So now the next stitch that I want to show you is the back stitch. It's like a basic back stitch, and I will do it kind of like upside down. So you come out with your thread. Then we also do a 5 thread increment. So I go in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 after 5 of the threads, and then I come out after 5. So far it's exactly the same as our running stitch. 2, 4, 5. So the first stitch is exactly the same. But then for my back stitch, so what is different now, I go back with my needle into the hole where I came out. So I go back, and then, so I go back in here and I come out 5 stitches beyond this exit point. Just double checking if I'm on the same row. So this is basically the position of my needle. I go back in where I came out, where I went in here, and I came out here like 5 threads further in, and with my needle I basically go back and come out 10 threads beyond that. And so the next one, I go back into where I came out, put my thread aside, and then I come out 5 stitches beyond that. Like here. Oops, I'm 1 line over. Here. Okay, I pull. And again, go in here, come back out here. So it's called back stitch because you literally go back, you always come back. The result is that it's a straight line and it's very sturdy that way. So if you do hand sewing, that I do a lot, I use either the back stitch or the running stitch. The back side of our back stitch looks kind of like a big fat back stitch because it's double. So every thread is there and has another thread next to it because we always go back. So this is why it's double as thick. So that's the big difference here. And I will do a few more. Okay, I'm coming to an end on this row. So as you see, you know, the last thing is like, and how do I end it now? So I go back the way I would end, so it looks good, you know, so I want the line to be continued. Then I flip over my whole work, and then I finish up my thread here. And for me, it's always important that I finish up in the same color. And that is really makes a difference when you use multiple colors, that you always finish up your thread in the same thread of the same color. It's kind of an odd way sometimes people say, but on the other side, when you turn your piece over, it looks so much better when the colors are on top of the same color. I don't know if that makes sense, but you'll see once you're doing a little more embroidery. So I do about 3 stitches down, and then I make another one with a little loop around the thread. So it's kind of a knot in a way. And then I cut it off. And I have the habit of finishing those right away. Like as soon as I'm done with one thread, I finish it. I don't let it hang down there forever and then do the finishing work later, because by the time you have like 7 or 10 threads hanging down there and they get caught in your other lines of embroidery and so on, and it's a big mess. We don't want that. Like really, just try to get good habits right away. So that's really always helpful. So now I will get in my gray thread again. And I also want to do a few variations on this row, on my back stitch row. So I come out at the same end as I went in before, like on this end here, and I come out at the same hole that I had for the black one. And now I basically do the same variation stitches as I did before. At first I do the more geometric one, and then see how this looks on a back stitch versus the running stitch. So everything is a little more closer together, will be a little more dense, and therefore maybe a little more visible. So as you see, while I'm doing all this with a loop, like an embroidery hoop like this, you always work on one stitch at a time. So there are no multiple you know, like going in and out and in and out. It's not really possible unless you have it really, really loose. And what's the point? So either or. Either you have the loop with your fabric tight, or you don't use a loop. And you see it is quite a different look. So these are basically the same variations. This is with a running stitch and that's with a back stitch. And now I will do the variation where it has the soft waves. So they all go in from one side to the next, or to like from upside down. So let me try this. And there is kind of a different look because it will overlap our black one. Kind of goes over it and covers it partially. It looks more like a twisted rope that way. So this is a nice effect that you can use, especially when you use 2 different colors. If you use the same, there's not that much difference. It just looks a little thicker than a regular back stitch, but having 2 different colors makes it really look very different. Like this is one of my favorite variations. If you have a top stitch or something to just enhance a little bit. So this is a good one. So last one, and then I go back through the same hole that I used for my black one. So now I'll show it a little closer so you have a good look at it. So these are the variations. Running stitch, then running stitch with the geometrical one and the more organic loop variation. And then we have the back stitch, same with the more geometric variation, and then with the more organic loop variation. So this has a nice feel to it. It's kind of a almost enhanced and lifted up. So okay, so let's talk about other stitches that we use a lot, and one is, for example, the chain stitch. I will use a black thread again. Okay, so I will start with my chain stitch. Come out at the end of my row. So what a chain stitch is, it looks very, very similar like the top row of your crochet piece. So it is basically a loop that is attached to another loop, and that's attached to another loop. And that's what we want to achieve with the embroidery yarn. So our loop will be just like this, a loop. So what we want to go back into the same hole that we came out from, and then we come out, oops, and then we come out like 5 or maybe whatever stitches, you know, below that. And the crucial thing about it is that when you come out here, your needle is on top of your thread. So the thread is underneath here. If the thread is on top here, you just make a running stitch, but we want the needle on top of our thread. Pull very gently, don't rip it through. You know, we want to have those loops. Now it's the crucial time. So we want that loop to be not too tight and not too loose. Like that. So this is my first loop. So the next one, I make my loop, just imaginative, you know. I go into the exact same point where I came out, and then 5 threads below that, I come out again, and I have my thread underneath my needle. So this is the important part. And then you loop. You pull the thread and create the loop. And all, like you see me like do this very gentle, so I have the same size and the same width of it. So again, I go in here and come out 5 loops later. Okay, I have my thread below my needle. And pull it, and then at the end I'm very gentle, loop it around, and so on and so on.
end
on our chain stitch. So the last one is always to make a loop, and then you're here on top. So you go back right around that last loop and then go back to the back side to fix that last loop in place, so that this is down there. And and then you can go back with your needle and even out a few irregularities, or like get them nice and straight. They are a little irregular in size because the weave of my linen is not perfect, so it is slightly irregular, and that's fine, but in the whole picture it's okay. So that would be the chain stitch that I wanted to show you. There is also, you can also do another variation, go in with your gray one and loop around that those little openings that I will show you here. It's the threaded chain stitch. So that one, I would just start here with my gray, and I start at this end for now, where I just went in with my black thread. I come out here with my gray one, the exact same location. I'm just careful not to pull my black thread into my gray one now and get a big mess in the back. So I always try to avoid a mess because I'm a lazy person, so I don't like cleanup work. So I try to avoid it in the first place. So what we do now with the threaded chain stitch is basically the same what we did here with our back stitch. So we go around our loop here and we just stay on top. We don't poke into our fabric. So we go around here and just grab the right leg of your loop and pull the gray one, and then we go into the next loop, but only in the right side. And then the next. Oops. It's very tempting to go through the whole loop. And I will only do half of this side here, so you see what I'm doing. It's a little easier if you have fewer threads on in your needle, but for visibility it's better, for you to see what I am doing here if I use the thicker material. So this one, and now I go back the other side. So I go to the outside first. And now you have to just think about how to do it so it is a mirror image to my now left side. So I want the thread basically to go over the right side here and then in. So that means I have to go in here, over there, and then from the inside out. So now this side I do the other way around, from the inside out. So I go to the next loop up, I come to the center here, and I poke my needle to the outside. Because I really want those two threads to be, it should almost look like a braid. So from the inside out. almost done. So before, our initial, the black one looked like a chain stitch, like really like a chain, and then this one here is more like a braid, which I like. It's a nice variation to it. So if you look at it now, so the next stitch I am demonstrating is the mattress stitch, and that is, or the blanket stitch. It's also called blanket or mattress stitch, and it is kind of a really interesting looking stitch that I usually prefer to be on the edge of a garment, and that can be a blanket, and that's where the name comes from. So we usually start from the left to the right. So we start kind of close to the edge of the garment here. And the first consideration we want to see how big of a stitch we really want to have. And you always think more about a square. Like think about a square. So you want to have the same length over, then you go up. So in that you go over and up. Let's say it's half an inch. So I go in basically diagonal from where I came out. So this should be the same width as the same height. So diagonal. And then I go in with my needle here and I just loop around my garment. When I loop around the garment, I have to make sure that the thread here that is underneath. So my needle is going on top of the thread that I just came out from here. And then I just rearrange my stitch here into that square. It comes over and up. So the next one, again a square, like you go over and up. And so I go in kind of diagonally from where I came out. And I come around here, around my garment. And I am on top of my thread. So this is important. If you have the thread on top, you will end up with a diagonal stitch. But we want to break up that diagonal stitch and make a side stitch, basically a side stitch and a long stitch, so that this is a nice square. And again, I go in diagonally, right here. I come around my garment or my blanket or my mattress or my whatever, rearrange things and then pull a little bit. And once you get the hang on it, it's really easy, it's very quick actually. This is a very quick, fast-paced stitch. I mean, this has lots of variations. You can do really irregular width, but then I would maybe consider have them all the same height. You can have them all like perfectly very close together. So can be all different kinds of things. When you look at your garment then from the side, you see the thread is kind of a finishing thread line here, which makes it really nice when you have a like an open-ended fabric. So the last stitch would be to just go around, your corner here and stitch to the back to finish it up. But what I will do, I will come into my actual loop embroidery and do a few of those with a variation to it. So now I start my blanket stitch or mattress stitch here on my loop. Same thing, I think about a diagonal, but no, let's do little tighter together. So I only go like 5 stitches over and 10 stitches up, let's say, to have a slim variation of that stitch. So again, I go 5 over and 10 up. I do the same thing. I come around here, but instead of going around the edge of my, you know, what I did here, the edge of my blanket or my fabric, now I just stitch out of my blanket. And it should be the same level of the first entering of my thread here. So the important thing is again that my thread is below my needle. So remember that. That's the most important thing with that stitch. So again, I go 5 over, 10 up. Same thing. I come out here at the same level as all the others. So this makes it really like a nice smooth line at the bottom. I put my thread underneath my needle. Do that, don't forget. And again,
and I'm not counting really, I just go with like what looks good, or the proportions of it, or where it makes sense. I just wanted to have a long, slim mattress stitch. But you get the idea. So, I will do a few more and then I will show you a variation. It looks really pretty when you have a more narrow blanket or mattress stitch, like this one here. Do a few more of that one. That variation that I'm going to show you is also done with a second color. See if we can make it to the end of the row. I thought it would not be enough, but maybe we can get there. Because of the height of the stitch, you know, you need a lot of thread. You'll realize that. So be prepared and have enough thread around so you're not in the middle of your project and then run out of something. Okay, let's do 2 more and then I'm fine.
let's end here. So again, you know, the last corner, I just go over that last corner to fix it and keep it in place. And I turn around and finish my work. The variation of my blanket stitch is that we do the same thing on top of our gray one, but from that side. So we have a continuous line. Instead of here, it's on the other side. And the way we start here and coming out at the side where we have the open stitches. And we come out about the halfway, the width of those two lines. So it shouldn't be all the way over, it's kind of halfway. So you come out here and what you want to do, think about that diagonal line again. So we want to get into our fabric here again, where our continuous dark gray line is, And then we stitch down to our open side. And we come out about halfway between the lines. Remember, we have to have our thread below the needle and then pull this. So again, oops, I pulled it a little too hard. So we go in here between those two lines and all the way up where our gray continuous line is. We get it down halfway. Oops. And have the thread below our needle. And again. So if you do this stitch a little denser and a little more together, you know, you can cover a whole surface with two different threads if you want to. You know, it really gets a nice look to it when it gets a little more dense. So I like that stitch when it's double. And it's a perfect stitch on the edge of a blanket or a garment. And decorative too. Okay, so I will end that variation here midway. So we have both possibilities. And that will be our last basic stitch here that I wanted to show you before we go into more fancy stitches. So see, I just went around that last stitch and went with my needle to the back, and there I can have my gray, and I will leave it there for more variations later on.